I recreated Arcane on my own for $0. The series holds the record of being the most expensive animated series ever created. Now, I wanted to see if I can recreate a scene from the show without spending any money at all. All the tools I use will be free and all the assets I need will be made by me. And after looking at every official making of material I could find, I think I've not only discovered the techniques they've used to create the show, but also what it takes to create something truly special. This was probably the most important part of this whole project. If I can't recreate this rocket launcher close enough, I might as well cancel the whole project, because it will only really get harder from here. And I need it for the actual scene anyway, so I might as well start with it. As a 3D artist, creating the model wasn't really an issue. I was more worried about the special technique Arcane uses to shade their 3D objects. They paint every model, including some of the shadows and highlights, by hand. The last time I painted a model in this way was almost 2 years ago, so I wasn't really sure if I could recreate the style well enough now. I started by blocking out the basic colors and some simple shadows to define the basic shapes of the model. Afterwards, I refined the most important parts, which also allowed me to add smaller details that aren't actually in the 3D model itself. Now it already looks pretty good, but it doesn't really react to any lighting in the 3D scene yet. So to finish it, I plugged the final textures into a shader so that it looks like it is actually living in the environment around it. And this is the final result. I think this looks good enough to continue, so now let's go a little bit more in depth and see what it takes to create a full Arcane style animation.
Let's stop and stare for a minute.
Just like creating the rocket launcher, you can separate the process for the whole animation into 2 main steps as well, with one bonus step at the end that the creators like to call the secret ingredient. This 3-step process is what most objects go through to reach their final look in the show, including, of course, Jinx.
No sunlight's off, I'm annoyed, I'm trying to focus, you fighting the void.
I started by sculpting her body with the help of some references from the show. In most big productions, you would start with 2D concept art for each character, and then 3D artists try to recreate those concepts as closely as possible.
I'm so ready, I'm so ready, I'm so ready.
The scene I'm trying to recreate is the one at the end of season 1, where she fires the rocket launcher for the first time. I already have one part of it, so all that's missing now is Jinx. There's also the environment, but I don't need to create a 3D model for that, and I will explain why a bit later during the process. For now, the main and most important goal is to recreate Jinx as closely as possible. The biggest problem with that is, just like her rocket launcher, a lot of the details on her have been added while painting her textures. They're not part of the actual 3D model, which makes working with references a lot harder. Luckily, I actually found a render of her without the textures as well. Look at how different she looks, so much smoother than you might expect. This is intentional to make the textures look as good as possible once you add lighting to them as well. But that created another problem for me. I can try to create the 3D model as closely as possible, but until I have painted her textures, I don't really know if I've captured her look well enough. If everything goes wrong, I might have to redo the whole 3D model. These moments of uncertainty happened multiple times during this project, either because I had to work up to a certain step to see if the results look good enough, or even worse, I tried a technique I've never really used before. And with Jinx's body and outfit looking pretty good so far, one of those scary steps was coming up next. The hair in Arcane has a very unique look. It's made up of these very big and broad shapes, combined with smaller, sometimes very fine strands, which confused me a little bit at first. I watched every making of video I could find to figure out how they created it, until I found this 1-second clip that told me that they've used XGen. It's a common tool mainly used to create 3D hairstyles with individual strands, just like real hair. Unfortunately, it's part of Maya, which costs all the money, so I had to stick to using Blender myself. But now I had to make a decision. I can either create a reliable and pretty good looking hairstyle with Blender's hair particle system, or create a great looking hairstyle by basically programming my own unique hair system using geometry nodes that is much riskier, unstable, might not even work at all, and could easily waste more than 20 hours in the process. I decided to do option 2. And guess what? It only took 44 hours. And I'm sure nothing will go wrong with it in the future. Anyway, let me show you how it works. To summarize the very boring math behind this, first you create a tube like this, then the system turns it into these hair strands, and afterwards you can customize it with these settings. The last thing missing is the shader, which I learned how to create through this tutorial by Lightning Boy Studio. Now, with her 3D model finished, there are 2 more steps to finish the 3D portion of this project. For her to move, she needs to have a rig, basically a skeleton to move the different parts of her body. This process can get very complex depending on how much control you want to have while animating. Luckily, Blender has an amazing free add-on called Rigify that allows you to create one of these complex rigs with a single button press. All you need to do is place the basic bones and the add-on will do the rest automatically. And after a little bit of tweaking and adjusting, it works pretty well. You can actually do quite a lot with this rig now, but one thing you can't do is this right here. For Tish, the studio behind Arcane not only used rigs to control their characters, but also shape keys. Shape keys are optional deformations on the model that you can use to create certain effects. They're often used, for example, to make expressions more expressive, or here, for example, they created them to make Jinx look younger and more innocent. I created that same slider for my model too, as well as 2 more to have a bit more control over her lips, but you could go a lot further with these if you really wanted to. And now, the last 3D part of this project is the actual animation. Of course, she can't just look like Jinx, she also needs to move like her. So, to recreate the scene as closely as possible, I placed the original animation with transparency over my 3D camera. My first goal was to match the most significant poses as best as I can. Afterwards, I can blend between them with a few more in-between poses and Blender's automatic interpolation, which fills the rest of the frames. This is actually how most animations are created. First, you lay out the most important poses, then you create the rest to blend between them. The difference between me and the actual animators on Arcane is of course that they didn't have this perfect reference to trace. Instead, they filmed themselves acting out the scenes to better understand how the character needs to move during them, so they don't have to guess. The whole animation process went surprisingly smooth. There were not really any problems that occurred during this step, except for my custom hair system, of course. And if I can't fix this issue, I might have to create the entire hairstyle again from scratch with the other system. But you know what? This can wait. Let's do something more exciting first. Texture painting is one of the things I was the least comfortable with during this whole project, but after painting the rocket launcher, I felt at least a bit more confident in my skills. I basically just followed the same process again. First, blocking out the general shapes and colors, then refining everything and adding some more detail. On its own, Blender's texture painting has always been extremely annoying and tedious to me. But there were 2 things I used during this project that made the process a lot more enjoyable. The first is a free add-on called Yuku Paint. It adds essential features like paint layers, as well as some really great quality of life features like automatic shadow generation or a much easier way to block out basic colors. If you do a lot of texture painting, this add-on is really good, especially in combination with the second thing, which is my own custom brush pack. Blender itself only really has a single round default brush, which is exactly why I created this brush pack with 50 custom brushes to cover as many use cases as possible. For this Arcane project, it actually worked pretty well to only use the hard round brush to paint everything, but in my previous projects, for example, I used it to paint this grass hill covered in snow for my Berserk animation, or to recreate this scene from Spirited Away. If you're interested in getting this pack for yourself, make sure to check out the first link in the description. And now, with my custom brushes in hand, my plan for the texture painting was once again to only really refine the parts that are clearly visible, and leave the rest in a fairly rough state just to save a little bit of time that I could then use to fix my hair system. Now it was finally time to see whether my Jinx looks like the original or I have to redo a bunch of stuff. The biggest thing I struggled with was imitating this looseness that the original has. Sometimes the colors blend really well together, and sometimes you can clearly see some very broad brushstrokes that look kind of rough, but still somehow work really well together. You can almost see the confidence and intention behind every one of them. The confidence that I myself was lacking, but with enough time and patience, I think I am pretty happy with the result. Now let's see if I can figure this mess out. And I actually did. It only took 6 hours this time. Basically nothing. Now it's basically perfect. Except for this flickering that I just could not... Nope. You know what? I want that to be there. Anyway, speaking of texture painting, I also painted the environment, well, at least partially. I basically grabbed a shot from the original and used Photopea, a free web version of Photoshop, to remove Jinx from the shot. And if that didn't work completely, I fixed the rest in Blender using texture painting. Now, there are only 2 more steps left before the animation is fully done. One of them is fairly simple, the other one is the step I was the most excited, but also the most scared of. The first one are the 2D VFX. In the actual show, 2D animators created these extra effects by painting on top of the 3D animation. Probably in a software made for 2D animation that costs a lot of money. But you can create something pretty similar in Blender as well. By adding a grease pencil object into the 3D scene, you can paint basically anywhere in 3D space. So, to paint the VFX on top, I just placed the drawing layer in front of my 3D camera so it covers the scene behind it. Now, all I had to do is redraw the animation from the original frame by frame, which wasn't really that hard, it just took a long time. For this, I also decided not to trace the frames exactly like I did for the 3D animations, because I thought drawing them myself would be more fun. It's a pretty simple process overall, and I'm sure I've missed some steps that made this process a lot better, but also a lot harder in the actual show, but that's how I created these shots for my own version. Now onto the last and probably also most important step of them all. The secret ingredient that makes Arcane look so great. This tiny clip perfectly shows what that means. All the elements of the scene are already there in the shot, but what gives the show its unique look and feel is being created during the composition stage. They are intentionally vague about this process in their making of videos, so it's hard to find any concrete info, but here's how I think they did it. Looking at this clip again, the process seems to start with the raw textures without any lighting. Then, during compositing, the lighting gets added in some sort of way. On top of that, we can also see some more typical effects like lens stir or glare that you would usually add during compositing, as well as the 2D effects, of course, that need to be combined with the 3D animation at some point. To me, it seems like they collect all the elements that make up a scene separately and then combine them all together in compositing to create the final look. The reason why I think they do it that way is because that gives them ultimate creative control. Don't like the shading on the face? Just remove it from where you don't want it and enhance it where you need more. Don't like the hair color? Well, now you can change it. Want to put more emphasis on the eyes? Select only the eyes to brighten them so they stick out more. This ultimate flexibility is, I think, what allowed them to create such a unique animation style in the first place. The 3D render gives you photorealistic shading, but you don't have to use it if you think it looks better without it. Maybe you want to add your own lighting. Whatever it is, you can do it now. I think I managed to create some of this myself, but I'm still very unexperienced in this step of the process, so it could have been a lot better. But I think that's also another, maybe the most important reason for why Arcane looks and feels so good. It's because so many experts from so many different fields came together to create this show. As a single person, you only have a limited amount of time to learn all parts of the process, so you'll never be as good as someone who has dedicated their life to one of those things. By yourself, you might be able to create something great, but only with a team can you go beyond that and create something truly remarkable.